trials, cried our share of tears, stumbled through the darkness, half paralyzed by fear. There's heartache in our cities, in every house and home. Our only hope for healing is you and you alone. Heal, 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 heal this land. On your word we stand. We seek your face, bow and pray, leave behind our wicked ways, rely upon your grace to heal this land. Not one of us is worthy, no one less than I. Still you sent your only Son to suffer and to die, so we could live in glory and one day see your face. We hunger for your blessing, your amazing grace. Heal, 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 heal this land. On your word we stand. We seek your face, bow and pray, leave behind our wicked ways, rely upon your grace to heal this land. Oh, God, you are merciful. Oh, God, you are mighty. Heal, 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 heal this land. On your word we stand. We seek your face, bow and pray, leave behind our wicked ways, rely upon your grace to heal this land. Heal, 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 heal this land. On your word we stand. We seek your face, bow and pray, leave behind our wicked ways, rely upon your grace to heal this land. Heal, 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 heal this land.
I don't have any script. Good afternoon and welcome to the Watchman Report telecast. I broadcast to the world for Jesus Christ. My name is Alan Williams and I call Jesus Christ by his Hebrew name, Yeshua HaMashiach. Today my guest is Chrstian apologist and my good friend Tad Lawrence. And we normally hold our interview to the second half of the program, but we're going to jump right into the interview today and discuss evolution. And I think you will find that Tad's exposition on evolution will be fascinating. Tad, welcome to the program. I think this is your third visit, and this is going to be an exciting show.
Great to be here, Al.
Okay.
It's my pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. We are going to talk a little bit about evolution, and where does evolution come from? What is the inspiration behind it? And as all of us know and believe in a God, if we believe in a God, we also know that there is a devil. His name is Satan. And he goes out to try to deceive us, a little bit of a minute to the arc. So by the time we reach the target, we have missed the target. And I will tell you that evolution
We would call that 1 degree. Right?
That's that 1 degree, minute to the arc, and that's what he's just trying to do. He's not just trying to nail you head to head, just 1 minute to the degree so that you can believe in something that'll take you off the target, and then we miss the target. And I would argue that evolution has been by far and away the most creative thing that Satan has put in our midst to help lead us away from God. Think about it, you all. Years ago, centuries ago, millennium ago, if you lost the battle to the tribe over there or the country over there, typically you would adopt their God as being the stronger God. But in this day and age, now there's an opportunity to say that there is no God, period. So it has been an astounding thing that Satan's been that he's put in place, and I want to talk a little bit about that.
And Ted, I just want to add a historical preface to that, or an addition to that, that this ism, atheism, communism, etc., most of those isms came into play in the 1840s, 1850s. So that's the period of time in human history when people began to not believe in God. Prior to that, people had a belief in some kind of God, whether it's a moon god, sun god, whatever.
That is exactly correct. It's very recent that this has been put in place, but even amongst Christians, and again, an additional problem with this is a lot of people believe in evolution, but that simply God was behind it. And so they absolutely think there's nothing wrong with believing in evolution. It was just that God did it the way he wanted to do it. He was ultimately responsible for creation. The problem that presents for us, and this is exactly what frankly happened to me as I'm reading through the Bible. I was not a Christian until I turned 38 years old. I'm reading through the Bible, and I had read through a couple times, and all of a sudden I'm in the book of Genesis. And all of a sudden, for the first time, I've really noticed that the sun, moon, and stars were created after the fruit-bearing trees and the herb-bearing seed, etc. And all of a sudden, I was raised to believe in evolution. That's what I was taught in school. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking, holy cow, all right, Lord, you're not going to lose me, but how do I understand your word? Can I take your word literally, or do I have to use my own IQ to interpret parts of your word? And that, I believed in evolution at that point in time, even though I promise you, I was a Christian at that point in time as well. I started to look into it. I had no idea what to do. I started praying, and I said, Lord, I need your help on this one. And I didn't know where to go, so I went to regular textbooks. Douglas Fudiyama taught.
Okay, now slow down a second.
Yep.
Because I know your mind is quick. You mentioned Genesis.
Yes.
Why is that particular chapter and verse about the fruit-bearing trees, why is that important to our listeners?
The reason why it's important is because sun, thank you very much, Al, sun was actually created after the fruit-bearing trees. Sun was created a day after the fruit-bearing trees. That does not work in anybody's evolutionary theory. You have to have sunlight in order for anything then to evolve, then to move forward, or to come together. So the fact that, and I think God did that intentionally, he put something in there to show us that this was his creation the way he wanted it, not the way our human brain was going to come up with it. And that is what did inspire me then to go and start looking at regular textbooks. I had no idea what I was going to find, but I'm looking at the textbooks that are used in college to teach evolution. I'm reading Douglas Fudiyama as one of the first ones. It's taught at Princeton. It's taught at Yale. I am reading also Evolutionary Theory and Crisis by an atheist, written by an atheist called Denton. As I started going through these books, especially Douglas Fudiyama's book and a couple of the others, one of the things that I did notice, 2/3 of the way through the book, there was no proof of anything. As I'm reading through that book, taught in every school on the planet, the language was, the evidence suggests that. The evidence seems to overwhelmingly point to. The evidence clearly shows us that this is how things evolved and this is how things worked. 2/3 through my first book, and I noticed that there was absolutely no proof shown whatsoever. I just broke out laughing. And I said, God, I don't have that answer yet, but I know you are right. I know that however you've done it, evolution is not the way it happened, the way it's described in this textbook. That is when I continued looking at other books.
Okay, now let me slow you down a second,
Yep.
because that is the challenge we issue on this program. All we ask our audience to do is to seek to examine the evidence, to search like you did, and search for the truth. If you indeed search for the truth, God will provide it to you. All right, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Al, because it was prayer that was very much behind my search for this as well. And so continuing forward, God did put in my hands, Henry Morse had just come out with a book. I didn't know him from Adam. Here in Cincinnati, we know the Creation Museum now, but the Creation Museum did not exist back in the time that I was looking into this. I saw his name. I read one of his books, then Evolutionary Theory in Crisis by Michael Denton, who is also an atheist. And I started just seeing what is the evidence for, what is the evidence against. And it really opened my eyes because very honestly what I can tell you is, myself included, people that believe in evolution know absolutely nothing about it. They seriously don't have a clue. And there have been so many things that have been overruled, have been pointed out as fraud, have been pointed out as just storytelling, and yet when that gets proved in later time frames, it's never been reported back to the public. It's just one of those things that they bury because they know any criticism of evolution, the paleoanthropologist is going to immediately be in trouble because he makes his money based on finding oldest known hominids, being able to find species, and being able then to become famous and get funding from National Geographic Science Foundation or the collegiate foundations or whatever.
Okay, now I'm going to interject something else again. If my mind doesn't skip me. This search for evolution, and I don't want this to come out wrong. It's going to sound like I'm defending Darwin, and I'm not. But Darwin admitted that he expected someday that his alleged theory would be overruled. So he, in his studies, and correct me if I'm wrong, admitted that he did not have the absolute truth.
He admitted from day one that he did not have the absolute truth in terms of evidence, but he also felt very strongly that that evidence would be found. And so not necessarily everything in his theory might be validated, but he was a firm believer in evolution, and he believed that that evidence would be found as time went on, and we found the fossil record, we got more into biology and things of that nature. So he did believe firmly in evolution.
And is it technically true, in a scientific sense, that what he espoused is not technically a theory?
Today, in fact, it is taught as fact all over the planet. It was taught when we were growing up, Al, it was taught as a theory, and evolution was taught as a theory. And then the creation scientists, who are PhDs, have the academic credentials, have the background, were finding the holes in the theory. And as they came out and started publishing that and making it known to the public that was willing to go and take a look at it, then the evolutionist, Tim White, who's the head of paleoanthropology at University of California, Berkeley, goes up to Richard Leakey, one of the foremost paleoanthropologists on the planet for a number of decades, and out said, we must go out publicly and declare evolution to be a fact and defend ourselves against the creation scientists who really don't know anything. And we cannot have the public ever think that evolution is not a fact. And so consequently, it now gets taught pretty much as fact everywhere you go today. When I was in high school, it was taught as theory. But today, it is pretty much taught as fact. Just as a thought for those of you that may not be familiar, Charles Darwin was the originator of the theory. There were other people that came alongside him right along those same time frames. It was really the mid-1800s, late 1800s, that he developed this theory. He loved nature, and we're going to talk about nature a little bit as well, but he loved the Galapagos Islands as an example. And I'm sure that all of you have heard about Darwin's finches, but he was looking at other animals as well. But he goes into the Galapagos Islands and he sees up to 13 different species that he named that were different from one another because of evolutionary forces. He absolutely based it on the size of the beaks, and noticed that the beaks were very different in size on a lot of these finches, and so consequently...
Let me add a geographical point. The Galapagos Islands are off the coast of Chile, out in the Pacific Ocean, and he went there on a ship named the Beagle.
That's correct. So And he had other things alongside us, but this is the one that is most commonly understood in the public, the finches. Because of the massively different sizes in those beaks, he put forward this theory that adaptation leads to evolution, and that these were in fact different species. The fact of the matter is, no, they're still finches, and there are, just like dogs, we've got labs, we've got golden retrievers, we've got pointers. These are finches, and what did happen that scientists later discovered is that there was a tremendous drought. The birds that had the bigger beak, the finches that had the bigger beak, had a better opportunity to live longer by drilling into the nuts and gathering food. The smaller beaks were not able to do it. And so there was just a period of time where the bigger beaked birds did outsurvive smaller beaked birds, but that was basically because of a drought that was taking place. But then when that drought ended and the rains came back, the smaller beaked finches were actually more efficient, according to scientists, and they blossomed, and they are now equally in there as well. So just because you have different sized beaks and 13 different finches, we still call them finches. They are not evolutionary different species.
What has happened there is mutation, which is quite different from evolution, correct?
Well, it's not even so much mutation. It is that in the same way that some of us are taller than others. So with finches, it was those birds that just had a bigger beak. And that's the way they were born, with bigger beaks. And so they had an ability to outsurvive the smaller beaked birds because of the size of the beak, allowing them to get to food that the smaller beaked birds could not get to. So it's not so much, there are mutations that can cause something, but mutations really don't create evolution at all. And mutations, that's something that we've been taught for years, that mutations come along, and that's what moves us into a different species or some different kind of creature. That's really not the case. There are mutations, we all have mutations, but any kind of a mutation that makes me a little bit different from you, Al, maybe I've got much better vision than you have, or maybe I've got better colored eyes than you have. Guess what, my brother? We're still both human beings.
That's not evolution.
That is not evolution. So one of the things I did want to talk about quickly, and then we'll move back into evolution. I firmly believe that Satan, obviously, this is a great creation by Satan. Now, I want to take you to a verse that Paul uses. It says, for the invisible things of him, talking about God, for the invisible things of him can clearly be seen, even the things he hath created. All right, so for the invisible things of him from the beginning of creation can clearly be seen, being understood by the things he hath created, even his eternal power and Godhead. So God tells us point blank, everything about him, everything that he's done, we can understand it by what he's done in creation. So let's look at that very quickly. And by the way, that verse was Romans 1:20. If you want to take a look at that, that's Romans 1:20. For the invisible things of him from the beginning of creation can clearly be seen, being understood by the things he hath created. So let's just look at nature for a second. Oh, the verse goes on, by the way, to say, so that they are all without excuse. We should know that there's a God that had to have done and been responsible for creation simply by the things we look at. So let's quickly talk about a monarch butterfly. And I know a lot of you are familiar with monarch butterflies. They come out of the cocoon, they develop beautiful wings, and they fly down mid-east and midwest on the North American continent, and they all go to the exact same location down in Mexico. Not Mexico in general, the exact same location, and they gather up,
same mountain.
exact same spot. They gather up in all the trees, and that is where they die. They do not ever return to the cocoon to tell the offspring how to get down there. And so very clearly, that's not something that can be explained in any terms by evolution. Another example would be a bird called the golden plover out of Alaska, in that general area. The golden plover is a little bit larger than a robin that we would recognize here.
Now slow down a bit now, because
I'm getting excited.
The monarchs have died down in Mexico,
yes.
that generation.
Yes.
But the new generation comes back to North America and Ohio and the other states. Now, how could they possibly know that?
Actually what happens is that I believe that what happens is that the offspring is produced, cocoons are left, and then when the monarch goes down, that's just the birthing of what they've left behind. And
Right.
that's the exact same thing that happens with the golden plover. The golden plover actually then...
But I can add this, Tad.
Yes.
If I was to take my kids to Mexico as little children and drop them down at that mountain, I guarantee you they could not find their way back to Cincinnati.
No, they wouldn't be able to.
So that's a God thing you're referring to.
And neither could I. I take I hate to tell you and admit this to my listeners out there, but I take a Garmin everywhere I go. I'm in a continual state of loss. Going back to the golden plover. The golden plover, what it does is it lays its eggs. It procreates, lays the eggs. It's only with the chicks for about 6 to 8 weeks. It starts eating up as much gram energy as it possibly can, and then every golden plover will take a 3-day, 3-night flight to the same location in Hawaii, just like the monarch butterflies coming down to the same location in Mexico. These golden plovers take the exact same flight, 3-day, 3-night flight to Hawaii, and the remarkable thing about it is they do not swim. These birds do not swim. These birds will never ever fly west to east again. They will never go back and show their offspring how to get to that location in Hawaii. The offspring now go through the same pattern. The offspring will then procreate the next year. They will lay their eggs. They will start eating up as parents as much gram energy as they possibly can to get prepared for this 3-day, 3-night flight. And after a couple of months, they leave their offspring and again fly out to that same location in Hawaii. 3 days, 3 nights, not knowing how to swim, not having ever been there before, not having ever spent any time flying over any body of water.
I think they call that the red eye.
That would be a good name for it. Scientists don't have a clue how that works. Again, if you look this up on the internet, it'll be something absolutely fascinating to you. Woodpeckers. My friends get tired of hearing about the woodpeckers from me, but...
Tad, we never get tired of hearing about woodpeckers here.
I was with a good friend of mine. She was 90 years old. Talked about this woodpecker that landed in the tree in her backyard. I needed to look at it. Never thought about woodpeckers. Looked them up that night. Woodpeckers. Did you know, Al, that woodpeckers, some kind, I don't call them species, they're all woodpeckers, but some kind of woodpecker can have up to a 10-inch tongue.
That's correct.
So 4 to 10 inches. That woodpecker beats its brains out against a tree. How did it know there was food in there? And by the way, it does not pull the food out with its beak. The beak would not be able to open up to grab onto the food. It is actually the tongue that stabs. The tongue comes out, it's barbed, and there are glands on the end of the tongue that release a glue-like substance so that the tongue comes out, can stab the larvae of the insect, pull it back into the mouth. There are then glands inside the mouth that dissolve the glue-like substance so that it can swallow it and not choke. The woodpecker, by the way, has the thickest cranium of any land animal per capita in size, and it needs that because it's beating its brains out all the time. And it shuts its eyes on every strike. And scientists used to think so that it wouldn't get dirt into the eye. No, it's hitting that wood so hard that the tree so hard that it would blow the eyeball out. How does evolution explain something like that? And by the way, if anybody has any questions to any of this information that I'm putting out, please.
You can call 513.
Thank you, Al. Go ahead.
279-8350.
And we will do our best to answer your questions. Another example is the giraffe. Nobody ever thinks of these things. The giraffe has a very large heart, 40 to 50 pounds, and it needs that kind of a size just to get the blood up into the brain with the long neck. Now, what happens when the giraffe spreads out the legs, lowers its head down to take a drink of water? What should happen to it?
Should be a blood pressure problem.
It should pass out. All the blood should be rushing into the brain, and it ought to pass out. Now the giraffe has the head down in the water, taking its drink, and all of a sudden the giraffe sees over there Mr. Lion. And that giraffe raises the head very suddenly. What should happen to the giraffe?
A reverse blood pressure problem.
Exactly, Al. It ought to pass out. Have any of you ever gotten out of your seat too quickly? Do you feel a little dizzy sometimes when that happens? Well, imagine the giraffe doing that. And what happens is that there is a valve right behind the brain and the neck, and there's another valve at the base of that neck, and it senses the motion of the giraffe's head, and those valves automatically open and close to control the blood flow. Now, explain that in evolutionary terms, please. One last one, and then we'll get into.
Let me add to that. Then.
Yes.
To me, that sounds like someone called God was a perfect designer.
God knew what he was doing. And again, going back to Romans 1:20, for the invisible things of him from the beginning of creation can clearly be seen, being understood by the things he hath created, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are all without excuse. Frankly, we are all without excuse. If we just paid attention to what he's created and thought about that, we'd know that there's no way that evolution
and that's how we
can work.
glorify him, by glorifying his creation. That's what he wants.
That is exactly what he wants, Al, and well stated. Humpback whales, to give you another example, humpback whales, they will, when they're feeding, they will take in deep breaths of oxygen, air, and then they dive, and then they will start swimming in a circle as a team. And the crustaceans, the shrimp, they do not like the bubbles. The whales will start releasing the bubbles as they're swimming in the circle. The crustaceans, shrimp, etc., are frightened of that, and so they gather inside that circle. By the way, the seagulls and the birds have seen this pattern for years. They pay attention to God's creation. They know that food's coming up, and they plop right down on top of the water and start getting the easy food. The whales then continue to tighten that, and then they come straight up with their mouths open, and that's one of the ways they feed. Again, who taught the whales how to do that as a team? Evolution? Not likely. Everybody knows about Pacific salmon. They go out.
Before you start on that, we need to let the audience know that you can type a question at the bottom right-hand part of your computer screen and hit the chat button.
Lastly, Pacific salmon. Oh no, if you get a chance, if you've ever seen the March of the Penguins, go take a look at that. I don't have time to get into it in today's show, but go look it up, the March of the Penguins. That will blow your mind. Pacific salmon, you're all I'm sure familiar. They leave the river that they were born in, the tributary they were born in. They go out for a number of years or whatever. They come back to spawn and then die in the exact same tributary that they came out of. They do not go back up the one a mile above or a mile below. They come up the one that they came out of. And again, these are just a couple things in nature I did want to highlight, showing that when you think about it just in that sense, evolution becomes an impossibility.
So what you're saying is, if a salmon spawns in the Columbia River, it's going to go back to the Columbia River.
It's going to go back exactly to that river, that Columbia River, and it will not go to any river or any body of water that's a quarter of a mile above it or a quarter of a mile below it. It will go right up that exact same tributary.
Okay.
So now let's get into evolution and talk about.
I thought we were into it.
Well, we're going to get into what we've been taught. And just very quickly, I do want to point out that there are a number of PhDs of scientists that do not believe in evolution anymore. And as science has caught up to the incredible complexity of how things work and how things were created, these scientists understood evolution cannot work. As an example, Francis Crick, who won the Nobel laureate for decoding the DNA molecule, discovers that the DNA, that's just simply the information. In today's world, we'd say that's the software that goes on our computer. And then the information goes out to the RNA and ribosomes, and that's what then goes to start creating the simple amino acids that then come together to create the protein molecules, etc. And when Francis Crick saw that and saw how complicated that was, he said evolution, not possible. He is still an atheist. Fred Hoyle, who discovered how carbon got created, when he discovered how carbon created a couple of helium atoms hitting each other, creating a very fleeting element called beryllium that then the helium has to hit, and that's what creates the carbon. Fred Hoyle, quote unquote, when I discovered how carbon was created, it threatened my atheism. And there are a number of other folks out there, well, Ogilvy and a number of others that I don't have time to get into.
Let's back up for a moment, because someone in the audience has put a question in. What is the definition of evolution?
The quick definition of evolution is that all creation came from a single source, and that single source was in a simple cell that continued to grow, mutate, turn into something else, then became phylum, became plant life, became animals, and that nobody was behind it, that this was something that happened by natural process and by total random chance, that there was no God, there was no science, that there was nothing behind it. It was just a completely random process that happened out of the blue.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head the statistical possibility for something like that happening?
Oh, Al, how much time do we have? I will give you a very quick example coming back to the DNA, RNA.
I would say you got a better chance of getting hit by lightning 3 times.
Well, let me give you something that the audience can go look up. Vasopressin is the simplest protein molecule in your body. And again, the amino acids come out. There are 8 amino acids, and vasopressin, by the way, controls the storage of water in the body. There are 8 amino acids that have to line up exactly correctly, come out of that hat in the exact right order, phenylalanine, cysteamine, etc. And it's got to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I was a business major. I have no science background, but as a statistician, I can calculate the odds of that. What are the odds of that happening by random chance? And it's just 8 times 8 times 7 times 6 times 5. It's 1 out of 40,300. Now let's go to insulin.
So that'd be like Joey Votto hitting 10 straight grand slams.
Very good. Very good, Al. You're a mathematician. Now I'm going to take you out of your field of comfort, though. Let's go to insulin. Insulin has 30 amino acids, and that, of course, controls sugar in the body. 30 amino acids, so to calculate the odds of that happening by random chance is the same process, 30 times all the way down through 29, 28, 27, and that is somewhere around 1 out of 8 octillion. Hemoglobin...
How many octillion?
8.
Okay.
Hemoglobin, I haven't even started yet, Al. I mean, you know, I'm giving you big numbers. We haven't even gotten started. Hemoglobin, blood, that is 400 amino acids, and the odds of that...
By the way, Tad, Darwin knew none of this stuff.
That is correct.
He knew nothing about the cells in our bodies being little factories. Darwin knew none of this.
That is absolutely correct. But again, that's why I wanted to point this out, as people came to understand the complexity of how things work and what's in there. You've got numerous scientists, PhDs, that no longer believe in evolution, that are still atheists. In fact, I saw a feature on history, the History Channel, not too long ago, about 6 months ago, where they were interviewing these PhD scientists from all across the globe that, in fact, claimed atheism, but they believe in something called panspermia. This is really interesting. And when we find out what is panspermia, they believe that very clearly there had to have been some guidance, and this is their proof now of extraterrestrial life, that there are aliens out in the universe, and they use now their science as a core to go alongside other archaeological discoveries, whether it's the pyramid or whatever, to prove that aliens had to be involved in our life, and that they were the ones that fostered and moved the process forward to have us turn into human beings.
And additionally, they knew that evolution was being threatened. Therefore, they had to come up with a new theory about evolution, that it came from some source in the solar system or outside the solar system.
My only question for these brilliant Nobel laureate PhDs is, okay, who then put it? Who put the first life on the first alien planet? That's my only question for them. We do have a question here. Is it true that an ostrich somehow learned to kill lions? That is something that I have heard. I don't believe it. I think if an ostrich goes crazy and can poke out a lion's eyes in the middle of its sleep, perhaps, ostriches can be brutal. They really can. But that is not something that I'm familiar with. So, but please keep the questions coming.
Would that be an ostrich going postal?
That would be an ostrich going coastal. It is also interesting to me, why did God create something with wings that could not fly? Unless he needed to prove something to us. So,
that's true.
Again, a very interesting, when you look at God's creation, very, very interesting.
Likewise penguins, right?
Likewise penguins do not fly. Lastly, I want to just touch on astrophysics for a second as well. When people started to understand how things really work there. The electromagnetic force, if the electromagnetic force were any stronger than what it is today, not 50% stronger, if it were any stronger than what it is today, there would be no heavier element than hydrogen, no nitrogen, no carbon, no oxygen, etc. And yet the electrical repulsion cannot be too weak either. If it were any weaker, then the protons would not hold together. If the suns existed, they would all just blow up like a thermonuclear bomb. Same thing with a strong and weak nuclear force. The strong and weak nuclear force wasn't even known about until the 1990s. There are four major forces: gravitational, electromagnetic, strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force. If the strong nuclear force, again, were any weaker than what it is, multi-proton nuclei would not hold together and we'd have no heavier element than hydrogen. Yet if it were any stronger than what it is, scientists are convinced that all the primordial hydrogen would have synthesized into helium, not just the 25% that they teach in their science classes. Without hydrogen, the stars do not shine. Now,
and let me add the second law of thermodynamics, which tends to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that everything is tending towards chaos. So for those people who believe that things are getting better, do you know anyone out there who's getting younger? I don't.
No, it's a good point, Al. Neither do I. As a matter of fact, I'm getting older in life, and I got to be honest with you, I'm catching up to the next generation, the older generation that's in front of me, very quickly. Now, I want to get into just.
By the way, that second law of thermodynamics is called entropy. Correct?
Entropy, correct. That is correct. Let's get into some of the examples of the things that were taught, because I want to tell you how they've been since overturned. There are some basic icons of evolution that have been taught for generations. And those icons are the Miller-Urey experiment. The Miller-Urey experiment, Nobel laureate tried to show that the original atmosphere in the Earth did not have oxygen in it. If there was oxygen in the original atmosphere, then the simplest cells, the simplest life forms would have been oxidized and then could not evolve into bigger things. And so they had to prove right away that there was no oxygen in the original atmosphere. That was one of the icons taught to everyone. It still was continued to be demonstrated in National Geographic and Douglas Fukuyama's books and all the books through the 1990s into this decade, even though all the scientists now are in agreement that they were absolutely wrong on that there was oxygen in the original atmosphere, but they still will use it as a demonstration of how evolution could have worked in their teachings today. Then there is another one, and that is that the evolutionary tree of life was reconstructed from a large growing bottle of fossil and molecular evidence, and that tree of life just started way down here, and people kept evolving and evolving till we finally got to Homo sapiens. If you go and get into this, you'll discover that we have what are called splitters and lumpers in the paleoanthropological world. And they, by the way, can't stand each other and are very different on how evolution works. Tim White, head of paleoanthropology at the University of California, is a lumper. And he says that essentially there was a tree, and we went through Australopithecus afarensis to Australopithecus anamnesis, or to Homo sapien up until modern man, and that there was that tree that led to life. They were all digging mostly back in Africa.
That tree would be like a palm tree.
Correct. Pretty much that there were some offshooting branches. But what happened is none of the dating methodologies work, by the way. Lipid carbon-14 dating doesn't help. Argon, potassium, argon dating is not very accurate. It's not consistently accurate. And so what happened is a lot of these paleoanthropologists started finding skulls in different locations outside of just Africa, maybe over in Asia. Homo erectus skulls, for instance, that were dated as early as Australopithecus afarensis, what we call Lucy, so 3 million years old. So very clearly, if afarensis, Lucy, is supposed to be leading up the evolutionary tree to something more advanced, which is what we've been taught, and then you have Homo erectus, which is only supposed to be 50,000 years old to 800,000 years old, Lucy could not have led to that Homo erectus that was found with a date of 3.5 million to 4 million years old. Ian Tattersall, head of the American Natural History Museum, then tells us that evolution was occurring simultaneously on the planet, all around the globe, all at one time. That there was no single source of evolution, that clearly the evidence shows that it was springing up all at one time. What are the odds of evolution in a tree-like form? Impossible. What are the odds of that all happening at one time throughout the globe? That evolution is occurring around the globe and turning into something we call human beings.
Do you mind if we back up for a moment?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Can you re-emphasize to the audience, you mentioned earlier the discussion of helium.
Yes.
Explain again to the audience why helium is so important.
Well, helium is important. It's light. It's very important for a number of reasons, Al, but even more important is the hydrogen, because without hydrogen, the sun does not shine. The stars do not shine. And so when you have these transitions and things aren't working the way we always assume they would work, it blows everything up. And so that's a
But isn't there something about the age of helium that rules out evolution?
There is something about the age of helium only in the sense that they use that as a dating process. What people don't understand is that helium is lighter and has been constantly moving out of the Earth's atmosphere at rates that we don't understand. And so to have any kind of a helium dating methodology attached to something, you can't rely on it. It's just unreliable.
Okay, all right.
I want to talk about Haeckel's embryos. This is another icon that was taught in every textbook, both collegiate and high school.
Yeah, that's still in high school
And
textbooks.
it's Haeckel's embryos. The argument there is that Haeckel drew drawings showing that all early embryonic stages of reptiles, human beings, animal life were very similar, and that in fact they all had gill slits in their earliest embryonic stage, proving evolution in the sense that we all came from fish. We had these gill slits, and that supposedly proved that we were evolved. Well, what scientists finally did discover, though none of them would acknowledge it, Stephen Jay Gould, head of paleoanthropology at Harvard, said he understood that that was phony baloney back in 1972. It never got publicized until 1995, around 1998. It was still sitting in Douglas Fudiyama's book in 1998. And when challenged, Douglas Fudiyama said, oh, and I apologize, I missed something. What they discovered when the equipment got better and we could really see, those are not gill slits. Those are just folds in the neck area. They are not gill slits at all. So the whole thing is total phony baloney, made up to prove evolution. When Douglas Fudiyama was asked, why did you have it in your book as an example and evidence for evolution, he said, I didn't know that they were just folds. I was taught that they were gill slits. Stephen Jay Gould said, well, of course, I knew it back in the 70s. Well, Dr. Gould, why didn't you ever tell anybody about it then? Why did you just let it sit out there?
So basically you're telling us that in the scientific community there's a lot of time and money and energy invested in this lie.
It's all time and money and fame. And so nobody wants to say anything against evolution, even when they know that it's been falsified, because it takes away from their career opportunities, their publicity, and their fame.
Yeah, and if I'm a young graduate student and I come in and challenge this so-called theory, I'm probably going to be chastised and ostracized.
There's no question that you would be chastised and ostracized, and in fact, I don't have time to get into it today, but I've got documentation for any of your listeners that are interested where scientists have admitted that biologists have admitted that especially with English-speaking people, that you can't speak out against evolution, and so they were reluctant to speak out against something that they knew in their own biology was wrong, but they thought that overall evolution is right because they didn't know all the information of the rest of it, and they didn't even suspect that any scientist would ever out and out lie about something and create something fraudulently. Another one, peppered moths, which I'm sure you're all familiar with if you remember your teachings. Peppered moths were used as an example of adaptation.
They're still in the high school textbook.
They're still in the high school
textbook.
Even though
it's been proven it's a fraud.
It's a total fraud. Those peppered moths, they put them on tree trunks to show how the peppered moths would show up more clearly during the Industrial Revolution in England. The birds would come in and swoop down and gobble them up, and what they found out is that the folks performing those experiments, peppered moths never go to tree trunks. Peppered moths are out in the fields. You never see them in forest. These guys were literally pinning the peppered moths to the trees, then taking the pictures, and then writing it up as proof of evolution through adaptation. I've got a zillion of these examples, but these are the primary icons of evolution that we were all taught.
And by the way, with those moths, and correct me if I'm wrong, what they tried to prove is that these moths had changed color because of the Industrial Revolution.
That is exactly right, Al, and that was through adaptation that the moths changed, and those were because they were the survivors then, not getting eaten up and spotted as quickly. Fruit flies with an extra pair of wings was used as an icon, 4 wings instead of 2. What nobody tells you is that was not something that kept them going. In fact, it was a hindrance, and they died out pretty quickly. I'm sure you're all familiar with the drawing of 15 ape-like creatures going from original man to modern-day man, and just to show you how bad this is.
It's a very popular poster.
It's a very popular poster. Clark Howell, University of California, put this in. The parade was 36-inch fold-out on pages 41 and 45 of the original edition. The parade was faked when it was first published. An explanatory note in the text of the book read that although proto-apes and apes were quadrupedal, on all fours, quadrupedal, all are shown here standing for purposes of comparison. An amazing statement in light of the fact that these 15 forms were not standing, they were walking across the pages from left to right. Some of them have 1 foot up in the air as they are walking. They are certainly not standing. If a first-grade child were asked to compare a chimpanzee or an ape with a modern human, the most obvious comparison for the child would be that aids that child is that the chimpanzees and apes walk on all fours. They're quadrupedal, and humans walk on only 2 legs. Now, is that evolution? Is our evolutionists being honest about it? Of course not. It's raw propaganda. Yet no evolution has ever protested this gross lack of scientific objectivity that has been shown to us through decades as to how we went from Cro-Magnon man, to modern human.
Well, isn't the chimpanzee hip itself totally different from a human being?
The chimpanzee hip is different, and Lucy, that was named as the oldest known hominid for a number of years, Australopithecus afarensis, discovered by Johansen. One of the things when they recreate these skulls which are broken and they put them back together, they had their own sculptor, they had their own artist put these things back together, and the way they tell them to put them back together, they had to do something with Lucy's hip because Lucy's hip clearly came out too far. So it did not walk the way human beings do in a straight upright posture. It had a sway to it as a chimpanzee would. One of the other things that nobody knows is when you discover a fossil, nobody else is allowed to look at the actual fossil unless you permit them to. And I'll give you one quick example.
You mean a scientist?
Nobody, scientists or anybody. What you see are casts that are made by the discoverer of the fossil. He has his artist, create that cast or draw the picture, and then he will show the fossil to his buddies or the people that are on his team. He will not show that fossil to anybody he feels is not on his team. And a classic example of that is Tim White, head of paleoanthropology at the University of California, Berkeley, supported Johansen when Johansen discovered Lucy. Just came out in 1992, discovered something he calls he originally called it Australopithecus robustus. Don't worry about the language. 2 years later, he changes it to Ardipithecus ramidus, which is now the oldest known hominid, 4 million years old, a million years older than Lucy, and is now the oldest known hominid on the planet. These fossils, you all, especially if they're discovered in Africa, they are housed in safes in Africa. Nobody can get to them without permission. Ian Tattersall, who is the lumper, Ian Tattersall is the lumper, splitter. Tattersall's the splitter, White's the lumper. Ian Tattersall's got the foremost pictures of the oldest known fossils. Wanted to just go out and take pictures of them. He goes out, the museum does not let him in. The museum has to give you permission also. Tattersall gets very ticked off, sends him an email. The museum response says, okay, we'll let you just take pictures. Tattersall goes back out a couple years later. He's in the waiting room, and then Tim White hears about it from one of the people, Asphalt, that was one of the people that was on the dig with him. White immediately emails to the museum, do not let him in. He is not allowed in. This is occurring in 2002, which is 10 years after the discovery of the fossil. And so 10 years after the discovery of the fossil, White is still not permitting another scientist to even take a photograph. Tattersall gets ticket. What are you guys trying to hide? Well, you got to understand, it was our blood, sweat, and tears that discovered it. We have the right to make a full to complete our discovery before we release it to the public. I've got a question. Is carbon dating accurate? Is the Earth as old as these tests tells us? Carbon dating doesn't even date the accuracy of the Earth today. Living carbon dating can only take you out to about 5,000 years. We were all taught Libby carbon dating. Alleluia. They discovered that Libby carbon dating really takes you out to 5,000 years and can't date anything beyond 5,000 years. That is a major problem for these evolutionists, because most of the fossils that they are taking a look at back in those days they wanted to look at them at 50,000 years, and they wanted to identify Homo erectus at 50,000 years. They wanted to identify Anamensis at 800,000 years to 1,000,000 years. There was no dating methodology that covered any date in between 1,000,000.
So they're fudging the evidence to make these things look incredibly old.
They are completely fudging the evidence, and what they don't tell you, in fact, potassium argon dating, we don't have time to get into how that all works, but there are numerous things that can dramatically affect that methodology. So when you just put it in a lab, yes, potassium half-lives into argon at some set rate. But if you have any kind of tremendous storm, chemical flows, water flows that are violent, that will change the potassium argon date. There is no way you can rely on any dating methodology on the planet today that goes out past 5,000 years, to be quite honest with you, and yet this is what they all try to do. The scientists themselves understand that they've got a problem with dating methodologies. Australopithecus africanus, which was the Tong child, was dated at 1,000,003 or something. This is supposed to be an intermediate, as one of the older known. And then all of a sudden they come in and they dated the fossil. They come in later on, this is just about 10 years ago, and they dated the cave that it was found in and found that it was only dated at 800,000 years old, indicating that the Tong child, Australopithecus africanus, probably is no older than 500,000 years old. Big hiccup. All of a sudden they've lost their missing link, and that is coincidentally at about the same time that Johansen discovered Lucy. So there was pressure, frankly, for everybody to buy into Lucy. It's no longer Australopithecus africanus. It becomes Australopithecus afarensis. But the point is the missing link is still there, and they didn't lose anything. Viewer comments, if evolution was real, mothers would have eyes in back of their head. I want to stay in touch with you. I need your help. That is very good.
I know some mothers like that. glad to see our audience has a sense of humor.
Our telephone number is 513-279-8350. And I suspect, Al, how much time do I have?
I don't know, sir. You got to go earn some money, I think.
Let me read one.
He's got a family to support.
Let me read just one last thing, and I will close it here. And these are quotes from the scientists, the paleoanthropologists. Andrew Hill, head of paleoanthropology at Yale University, states, "It has certainly been possible to get away with being an unexacting practitioner in the science of paleoanthropology." He goes on to observe that the casual student can easily discern the rules of paleoanthropology. They are: every new fossil hominid specimen is the most important ever found and solves all known phylogenetic problems. Every new hominid specimen is completely different from all previous ones, no matter how similar. Every new hominid specimen is a new species and probably new genus, and therefore deserves a new name. And compared to other sciences, the mythic element is greatest among paleoanthropology.
Did you say the myth?
Yes, I did. Yes, sir, I did. The mythic element of paleoanthropology, and I am more than happy to sit down in front of you and any paleoanthropologist and just ask the questions and see what those answers might lead to. But what I am convinced of now, paleoanthropology, and I've got good friends that are paleoanthropologists, but it is not science. It never gets confirmed by anybody. Nobody gets to look at your fossils unless you give them the permission, and they've already bought on. And as I pointed out, a number of these things have been reclassified over and over again when new evidence shows that, that they didn't really exist. That the new evidence has given us better evidence as to how evolution really truly does work, and we've got to now go down that path. So with that, Al?
Well, I want to ask you one final question.
Yes.
In today's scientific community and the advent of intelligent design, do you see any progress toward a movement towards intelligent design, more of a creation-based scientific community?
There clearly was a strong movement there for probably about 10 years, 1995 through about 2005. I think it's still there. The difficulty, frankly, is getting people to sit down and say, I really want to learn this language. I want to learn this information. So I think there are a lot of people out there, Al, that have a faith that God did what he said he did and just don't believe in evolution. There are not a lot of people that are really, taking it up to go study these books. I have a number of books right here. This is written by an evolutionist. These are other books. They've all been underlined.
So the audience can see them.
This is The First Human, written by an evolutionist, and it is written by Ann Gibbons. You ought to take a look at this. Here she's an evolutionist, and she points out the problems that are in that paleoanthropology as a science. And she shows you what the holes have been, going right to Leakey, going right to Tim White, going right to all the prominent paleoanthropologists that have ever lived. And you can see I have spent the time to look into it because I was flabbergasted, having been taught evolution in my high school, and then understanding that it contradicted God's Word completely. And once I got into it, I wanted to be able to share this with my children, with my friends, and with people that are interested in it. But Al, back to your question, I'm really not seeing a lot of people that want to spend the time learning what does Australopithecus afarensis mean, Ardipithecus ramidus, Zinjanthropus boisei. By the way, Zinjanthropus boisei, that was a skeleton that Leakey found. He declared it to be Australopithecus africanus, and that skeleton is Boisei, by the way, was the name of the guy funding him. These are not scientific names. Boisei was just the name of the guy funding him. 2 years later, Leakey admitted that this was not a human, a hominid, the oldest known hominid ever found. Got written up in National Geographic in '67 as the oldest. 2 years later, he found something else, and he said, no, that one was actually an ape, Australopithecus robustus. But that's how quickly those things change. Adding to the notion of mothers evolving, viewer adds that real mothers would have more hands too. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Again, the books, Icons of Evolution, Science or Myth. This one's written by Jonathan Wells. Bones of Contention, written by Marvin Lubenow.
And let's show that one
And
too. Al.
finally, The First Human by Ann Gibbons.
These books are easier books to get into and understand the language and really understand the fraud that has occurred in this thing we call science, paleoanthropology. If you want to get into deeper details into the biology, talking about mitochondrial DNA or any of those kinds of things, we can provide that information as well.
What is your contact information?
My contact information is Colin Driscoll at 513-792-2139. And my good buddy Al, please feel free to contact him anytime and all the time. He knows how to get a hold of me.
513-279-8350, or you can get me on Gmail at heyshomer.on.the.wall@gmail.com. Ted, thank you very much for coming on the program again.
Al, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
My pleasure, sir. Well, give us a minute or two while we switch around here, because Gwen is going to come up to the table. Also, I'd like you to know that I am available for speaking engagements for your church, organization, and ministry. It's my desire to build up the body of Christ and evangelize non-believers as we approach the rapture and end times.